Hey, how's it going everyone? My name is Brandon Clements and welcome back to another video here on Glassand. Finally, it's been a while since we made a video, but today we're going to be talking about Asus and my Asus color workflow and why I switched over to Asus. So let's go ahead and look at this real quick to show why I switched over to Asus. It was really just to take out the guesswork in color and production. A lot of the times I would get footage from different camera manufacturers that would be in the same project, and then I had to mix it with CG elements. You know, there was all these different color spaces that were happening in my project. So I wanted to make sure that everything that came in, the camera data, whatever it was, went into this Asus input display transform, IDT for short. So that takes the camera data, or the actual rendered image, and it converts it into a scene referred linear data. So it takes everything and puts it into color or linear color data. Hopefully that format is OpenEXR. Half float will do just fine. And then you can do all of your color grading. You can do whatever you want on the footage. It should look relatively similar between different camera manufacturers thanks to the IDT. And then you would actually output that video or that image, whatever it is, into a certain ODT, which is another transform that's could be a specific color space like Rec 709 or Rec 2020, or it could be a display type like P3 or any of whatever else that you want to send it out to. So that has really simplified it for me. You can see when we set it up on this computer, I'll walk through the steps and how to do it in Blender. So what you want to do is go into your edit variable system settings, and you want to edit your environment variables. Come down. You can see that I have one that is OCIO. The way that I did that was you just click new. You would type OCIO, and you need a variable value. And you need to browse to your Asus. The latest and greatest is 1.2. I believe Asus 2.0 is trying to release sometime in 2021. But for right now, 1.2 at the recording of this video is what you want. And you just click the config.ocio, the open color IO work config file. So you would just open this. I'm going to go ahead and cancel this. I will also include in the description box down below where to download this and where to keep an eye on all this stuff. So definitely check that out. Let's go ahead and hit cancel. I don't need to do any of this because it's already set up. And once that config file is set, you can change your look transforms, which will be on your viewers. You can change the OCIO nodes inside of Fusion to go in and out of different color spaces. And then you can actually change your project color space if you would like. Now it's time to go ahead and jump into Blender and check out the difference. So when you actually open your scene file, you'll notice in the render settings in the bottom right that we do not have the filmic settings anymore. Under color management, we have what our display device is set to Asus, and we can't change that. So if you, for whatever reason, wanted to go back to filmic for a certain project, you can go ahead and just delete the environment variable and then set the environment variable back if you'd like to jump into it again. So we also have our view transform. So I was talking about the different kind of viewers that you can set to. So these are primarily color spaces on right here, the Rec 2020, Rec 709, sRGB. Right here is sRGB. I like to be in the display transform P3D60. I like the way that that actually looks. So if we go ahead and jump over to our viewport shading of our render view and give it just a second for our shaders to compile, you can see now that I can come in and perhaps change this from P3D60 to Rec 709. This scene obviously isn't probably the best to show you just because it's so dark and moody and everything, but if we change it back to sRGB, you can see it's a little bit different. let's go ahead and deconnect this volume for a second and change that one more time just so you guys can see the difference. You may not see it in the video recording, but the P3D60 kind of has a little bit of a lift in some of the shady areas. So yeah, you can go ahead and play around with these different looks in your scenes, and we'll be able to utilize this later inside of Fusion, or I should say Resolve. They're both basically the same software now, Fusion being inside of Resolve. So what you would want to do in your scenes is for your linear EXRs that are going to be your lighting information, you want to change this. You can see that as I go in, the menu gets larger, but I have limited options. You want to back out far enough so that you can go to linear sRGB texture right here. So that's what you would want to change your EXRs to, that light your environment. So like if we change this to 1, you can see that the EXR looks pretty good. It looks just like it should, by default. If it's over on Asus CG, you can see that it's pretty saturated. It doesn't look quite like we would expect it to. So we put that back to linear sRGB. I'll put this back to 0.1. We'll connect our volume again here in Eevee. And you want to go into your actual textures for your objects and make sure if it is in the color channels, like the base color and the emission here. I have it set to roll matte, which is, if you hit M on the keyboard, it will change it to, basically it's an sRGB color space right here, this utility sRGB texture. Just a really quick way to do that is to click and hit M, roll matte, sRGB texture. They're basically the same, the exact same color transform. So if we go into something that may have a normal map and some other effects on it, like this brick wall, you can see that I have the roll matte set, and then I have utility raw, which is over here for any kind of texture that goes straight into a attribute like metallic, roughness, specular, so on and so forth. Even the normal is set to raw, and you would do the same for displacement because it's not actual color data. It's just using the RGB pixel information to drive certain aspects of the shader or the shader's attributes. Okay. One other thing before we move on, I want to show maybe some folks who aren't familiar with Blender how to connect these different camera cuts to a timeline. All you need to do is create a marker by hitting M, and then you select the camera that you would like, and you can hit Control B, and it will create a bind on the timeline. So the markers will indicate where the different cameras will switch. You can see that these two are the same, so they don't change, but 01, 02, they will change. So you can go ahead and you can delete those markers by selecting it and hitting X on the keyboard and selecting delete. And we'll go ahead and render this out. Make sure that it is set to OpenEXR, RGBA, float half will be just fine. And let's jump over into Davinci Resolve. Okay, so here we are in our project in Resolve, and this is the rendering. It's a PNG sequence from Blender Filmic color. So you can see that it looks really cool. And this is the sequence from Asus CG. This is the OpenEXR coming out of Blender. So you can see that it looks very much like linear footage, and some of those highlights are really, really pingy. So how do we work with this in our project? Well, there's a number of ways we can do that. I find the easiest way is to come into our project settings, go ahead and set our color science to Asus CCT. The CCT and the CC, the difference between the two, the T stands for toe. So this will give us a little bit better control on our lift since it doesn't go all the way down to 0 like Asus CC does. If you looked at this on a graph, it basically goes all the way from 0 to 1 in a linear fashion, and this toe gives us a little bit more of a lift so we can kind of control those darker areas. So I would recommend, say, work with Asus CCT, And then our output device transform, I'm going to go ahead and set this to what we had in Blender, which was P3D60, and go ahead and hit save. So what that will do for the PNG sequence, it'll look really weird. And then this looks a little bit closer to what we actually had in Blender, but not quite, because we need to come into here and tell this system, this kind of Asus workflow, what these input transforms are. So we, if we were to remember our graph, we need to tell it what it is. So this would be like a camera manufacturer, if it was a certain type of camera. Well, this is basically just sRGB images in a sequence. So you can see once I set that, we're back to exactly where we were before. Now this, the one that's OpenEXR, we need to set this one to Asus CG, and you can see those highlights come back immediately a lot better. So yeah, the differences here are pretty crazy. So if we go to edit and we look at this one coming from Filmic Blender, it feels very natural, in my opinion. It's not saturated. It looks like it was shot on a camera. It looks pretty cool. But if we look at this one, you can see the colors are much more rich and saturated. The mixing is a lot better. In my opinion, I think that this is, a stronger kind of overall output from something like Blender, where things are as saturated as you think they would be. Whereas with the Filmic, it's a little more foggy kind of looking. But, overall, I like both. They have their advantages. Let's go ahead and go into the color section here. Okay, so here we are in the color space. I'm going to go ahead and add a node label and call this primary, and we'll begin working here under the primaries wheel. Overall, this P3D60 look that we have on it, I'm going to go ahead and kind of push the gamma over to something warmer, and both the gamma, and you can see this gain as I move this around. It's really kind of taking that blue that we had before. If I actually hit Control D on this primary and go between, you can see this is starting to look a little bit better. I'm gonna back that gamma off, and I'm actually gonna come into the temperature here and kind of warm it up a little bit in the temperature aspect. So and then also with the tint, I'm going to kind of play with this and kind of push it a little bit more magenta, so you can see before and after what a huge difference it's making, just because that blue light was so saturated. And I can push this a little bit more, probably so it's not so blue. I always kind of do things extreme and then start to back them off just a little bit. Okay, so let's go ahead and add another serial node just by hitting Alt S, and I'm going to label this one. Let's go ahead and just kind of, this will be, I guess, our look, and we'll go into our log, and let's actually take the shadows not that far. Let's see, my wheels here kind of got a little bit crazy. We can reset this again and kind of just slowly take this down just a bit, just so it's a little bit darker. Let's kind of push this into the green a little bit. We can kind of take this mid-tone a little bit into, let's see, kind of this bluish area. And then this highlight is really going to be like these really super pingy highlights. So you can see if I do that extreme, it's really going to change the way those look. So I'm going to kind of just push it a little bit towards the blue, just to kind of balance it a little bit more. Okay, so I want to go ahead and bring up my scopes. So I'm going to look at this Rgb Parade and kind of use this to maybe shift and balance some of these colors just a little bit. So you know what? I'm going to go ahead and add another serial node. And Just kind of use this as a way to balance and kind of bring my offset up a little bit warmer and bring my midtones maybe a little bit more this way. So I still have in this primary, I've kind of taken this a little bit too far, I think, in the tint. So I'm going to push it up from like 20 to like 35, and I think that looks a little bit better. So overall, this is the changes, and you can see they're radically different. The last thing I'm going to do is add a vignette. So I'm going to go ahead and call this vignette, and come into here and add a mask and kind of scale it up a little bit, feather it out, and then we'll kind of back out just a little bit. You can see how the vignette is going to be affected here on this little node. So I'm going to invert it. So we're looking at it this way. So I'm going to go into my curve, and I'm going to come and try to pull this down just a little bit, somewhere around like the 0.4, and just pull that down and see the difference there. And then I'm going to add an outside node. So I'm going to come into add node and add outside, and I'm just going to push that up just a little bit. So you can see there's a difference overall. And wow, working with Asus and doing something like this is just so awesome, because you have that flexibility to kind of change up these shots, you know, exactly how you want them to. And yeah, it's overall just really fun, and I hope you guys agree. I have a few more things that I actually want to do before I render this out. I can go over to Openfx, and there's some really cool effects that are up here. I just wanted to show you guys. You know, there's this glow that we could throw onto here, and as we play with the threshold, you can see that it gets really crazy, and something that I want is just like a very subtle effect. So we can, you know, kind of leave that. Even that's a little bit too much, but I'm just going to go ahead and call this glow. I'm going to add another node into here, and let's see, we can add some chromatic aberration. So I'm going to call this CA for short. And you really have to kind of zoom in to see this, and it's going to be a very subtle effect. But we're going to kind of bring this up just a little bit, and maybe bring that down. And like I said, it's super subtle, but it will just kind of distort some of these edges a little bit. And you can come up here to the center X and kind of shift this a little bit if you want to kind of get a more exaggerated effect. But it's basically a phenomenon that happens with some cheaper different lenses. So it's kind of cool. And I think the last thing we'll do is add some grain. So I'm going to come down here and try to find grain. Here we go, film grain. And we'll add that to it. Turn that on and off. We'll go ahead and do 35 millimeter. So just very subtle. And I think that should do it. So let's go ahead and deliver. We'll call this one Asus output. And we're going to use the in and out range. So we're going to snap it to there. We'll change it to an MP4. H.264 will be fine. We'll change this to NVIDIA just because we have NVIDIA cards in our system. And all these look good. We could also use some of the presets that are up here too. They're actually really good. So we'll go ahead, add to render queue. We'll pop it over here, and we'll say start render. All right, so that will do it for this one. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you learned something new. Maybe let me know how you guys are using Asus in your workflow. I'm going to leave this scene file on Gumroad, so go ahead and download it and check it out if you'd like to. And we'll see you in the next one. Take care.